Hello, welcome to another edition of SEC Football Weekly, brought to you by Bud Light and his predictions amongst friends. I'm Hans Heiser, your host, and we'll bring in Alex Martin-Smith live from Nash Vegas, as I imagine you're getting overwhelmed with Alabama Crimson Tide fans right about now.
Yeah, the storm is coming. I'm afraid to leave my house, especially Thursday and Friday. I think I'll stay indoors before the game.
Well, before we get started here making our predictions, I got to tell you, I was completely wrong, and I'll be the first to admit when I make a mistake, so long as it's not at my house. My wife will be the first to tell you that. But I really thought LSU had it cooking this year. After the first couple games, I thought Etling was going to be, I don't want to say the answer, but serviceable at quarterback. And you figure once they got Arden Key back and some of those pieces on defense, that they definitely would have shown up a little bit better than they did last week in Starkville. A 30-point loss for Ed Orgeron and the Bayou Bengals. Did you see this coming at all, Alex?
No, I think even the people who were gung-ho about LSU this year, or the people that were even really excited about Mississippi State's chances were pretty shocked by that margin there. And I actually went with LSU. I know you were out, but Matt Stewart had the gumption to go with MSU, and I wish I would have joined him because it was such a stunning performance from Nick Fitzgerald all the way down. Aris Williams at running back. The defense looked strong. And I want to believe, I really want to believe in Mississippi State after watching that game.
Well, we're getting some comments here on Facebook, and you guys can hit us up at SEC Country on Facebook Live. And guys, he says, what did I tell you? This is from Joe Lewis, that I called it 100% on the LSU score. So apparently some people did see it coming, but we'll pick up there. Mississippi State, the Bulldogs rolling into Athens. Georgia 3-0, Mississippi State 3-0. I mean, this is a heck of a showdown. This is actually, you see it right there, Alex. They've never faced one another when both being ranked. What's your overall view of this football game?
Well, I look at these two teams, I think, as the primary potential challengers for Alabama this year. Just as it stands, I think Mississippi State and Georgia, those are the two teams that have a shot potentially knocking off the Crimson Tide, Georgia being if they play in Atlanta at the end of the year. So that's sort of my look at this. Who's fitter out of these two teams right now? Who's the stronger? I like MSU's ceiling. I think that's probably a little higher than Georgia, but Georgia has more talent. The program is much more consistent. I really do like what Jake Fromm has been doing at quarterback, even though I heard Jacob Eason was back at practice today.
Yeah, Jacob Eason was back at practice. On the bulletin board that you saw, Malcolm Parrish was expected back. He and Eason both returned to practice on Monday, but it looks like Parrish is not going to go. I mean, it's up in the air at this point, but coming off a broken foot, don't expect him to be there on Saturday. But folks are going to be turned up for this one in Athens. This is a pivotal football game for both of these teams. And I'm going to start, you mentioned Georgia's defense, which, the expectations coming in this year with 10 starters returning is that they were going to be good. But I don't think anybody really knew how good. I watched this team play, and that front seven, Alex, they got 3 or 4 guys that are going to be playing on Sundays up there. That's going to be tough for Mississippi State, I think, a team that likes to predominantly run the football.
Yeah, people watched, Lamar Jackson go up against Clemson last week, and this is going to be sort of a diet or a light version of that matchup where you've got a really outstanding quarterback who can throw and run in Nick Fitzgerald, and in a very strong front seven on the Georgia side. And that battle is probably going to determine, the fate of these teams on Saturday. But I really enjoy watching Georgia's defense. And again, they have so many playmakers on offense that if Fromm can come through and make some plays in the passing game and do enough to win like he did against Notre Dame a couple weeks ago, I really like Georgia's chances here.
The one thing about college football I think that people love is that you're dealing with young adults, and anything can happen when these guys get on the field. I mean, is Mississippi State the same team that beat LSU at home by 30 last week? Is Georgia's defense the same kind of defense that held Notre Dame in check, a team that just ran for 400 and something yards against Boston College last week? That's why they played the game on Saturday. I want to talk about the young man, Aris Williams, the running back for Mississippi State. He jumped off the page for me, off the screen rather, last year in the Egg Bowl. This is a guy, I think he's coming off 32 carries last week. He wants the football. He's going to get it a lot. Is he enough to carry Mississippi State to a win on Saturday?
You know, him alone, just his performance alone is not going to be enough to get them a win. But if he has a big game, and you couple that with a big game from Fitzgerald, who's been one of the more consistent quarterbacks, numbers-wise, he's gonna get his yards for the most part. I think if both of them can put forth a great offensive performance, I don't see Georgia necessarily surviving a shootout. So I think the lower the score, the more that benefits Georgia. And if both Williams and Fitzgerald are playing at a high level on Mississippi State's offensive side, that's going to be some big trouble.
You mentioned Jake Fromm earlier, and here he is coming into his third start. He made a couple mistakes last week in the game against Samford. There was a ball that he fumbled that he tried to pick up, typical freshman mistakes. But I like his progression. I like the way he's gotten better from week to week. And I think offensively, it helps when you have guys like Nick Chubb and, of course, a guy that you and I both love, Sony Michel, coming back from an injury. Both will be in full fold on Saturday. So I expect Georgia to give him a heavy, heavy dose of the run game.
Yeah, I think so. And I really, really loved what they did with their game plan against Notre Dame, with Fromm making his first start. I mean, they spread out the ball well. They used both running backs equally and made the plays that Fromm had to make. They made it easy for him to do so and put him in position to show some of his special athleticism and some of the really, really nice throws that he can make. So I expect them, this coaching staff on Georgia's side, to come out and give Fromm another easy game plan to execute, and that's going to be made all the easier with really strong performances by Chubb and Michel, which is probably the best running back duo in the country.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex. I don't think you try to outsmart anybody at this one. I think you just line up and try to run the football as many times as you can, and if Mississippi State can't stop it, then it's all she wrote. I like the Georgia Bulldogs in this game for that reason. I think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively against Todd Grantham's 3-4 defense, and I think Georgia's going to control the clock. And because Mississippi State, I don't want to say they're limited offensively because they're not, but if they get down early in this game and you're asking Fitzpatrick to come out there in the second half and throw it 20 times, that's asking an awful lot of an offense that doesn't like to do that. So for that reason, the fact it's at home, I like Georgia in this one. I actually like them by double digits. Give me 35-25 Georgia.
Yeah, I like what Mississippi State might be able to do this year. But last week against LSU, I think it's yet to be determined really how good that LSU offense is. And, I am just hesitant to really jump on board the bandwagon for MSU. And I think Georgia, they're going to keep it low scoring. And that running duo is going to provide a huge test for the Mississippi State defense. And I don't think they're going to be able to pass that test this week. So I've got Georgia as well.
Hey, there we are. We're on the same side there. And don't forget, guys, we're brought to you by Bud Light. Huddle up with your friends and some ice-cold Bud Light, the beer that's famous among friends on game day and all season long. And moving along, I think this football game is as interesting as anyone we've had all season long in the Southeastern Conference, and that involves the Kentucky Wildcats and the Florida Gators. Alex, were you even born when the last time Kentucky beat Florida?
Yeah, I don't want to make people feel old, so I'll just say no, quite simply.
I mean, it's been 30 years, and I think when you look at this, there's some great notes up here about this series. I think when you look at the history of this, one of the reasons it's so one-sided is Florida, Alex, athletically always a far superior team. You throw the suspensions in the mix with this Florida team and their limitations on offense. I don't want to say that Kentucky's more athletically gifted than they are, but I don't think it's as one-sided as it has been in years past.
Yeah, any streak that lasts 30 years is the benefit of a lucky bounce at some point or a crazy ending. And a few examples, I think off the top of everybody's head who's followed this series is you look back at '93, which was sort of the breakout game for Danny Werfel. He throws the winner with 3 seconds left. I think it was '03 when Kentucky was up 21-3 going into the fourth quarter and lost. A few years ago, Mark Stoops brought Kentucky down there and they lost in double overtime after going up 7 in overtime. So it's not like It's just been completely one-sided in these 30 years, just blowouts every single year. It really has been some unfortunate bounces or breaks for Kentucky, and I think that's important to remember.
We got pure hatred coming in for the Florida Gators on our SEC Live talk feed. I won't mention it, but they've been so successful for years. You talk about winning 30 games in a row against Kentucky. If you're a fan of another team, you're going to kick them while they're down. And in spite of the miracle that took place down at Ben Hill Stadium last week, Florida's been abysmal this year. I mean, they got manhandled by Michigan. I think their defense this year scored 3 touchdowns. Offensively, they've only had 2, and one of them was a 66-yard Hail Mary. We know about the suspensions, but athletically, do they have enough to put enough points on the board with their offense to go on the road in the SEC and win a game? We mentioned Kentucky, but this place is going to be packed, 61,000 people, so you got to think that emotion is going to play a heavy part in this football game as well.
Yeah, I think all you need to know about Florida, the state of Florida's offense outside of that Hail Mary was right after that play, and TV went up to Jim McElwain to ask him a few questions. He just looked like he wanted to go sleep somewhere for about 20 years. He looked like he was going to cry or something. It's just, there's no real hope, I don't think, for this Florida offense at this point. They need to show us more than just a crazy game-ending touchdown pass. Felipe Franks has a long way to go. And then that off-field scandal with the credit cards, I mean, that's deepening by the week. And, these players are looking at felony charges now. And, that you can't tell me that that's not a distraction for their teammates of that program.
Looking ahead, the winner of this game is going to be sitting pretty. Kentucky has 2 home games against very winnable. I think Missouri and Eastern Michigan come to town. So if they can find a way to win this, they're looking at 6-0 before they go to Mississippi State. So Kentucky 6-0, I don't know that that's ever happened before. And then you're looking at Florida. If as bad as they've been, if they find a way to win this, Alex, they're 2-1, and they don't play on the road again until November 4th. So the winner of this game has got a pretty good chance to stay in the SEC race until the very end.
Yeah, I think before all the Kentucky fans jump on you, I think you are forgetting the great Bear Bryant year of 1950 there, Hans.
Apparently so.
But yeah, this would be a huge win for Kentucky, not only for the 30-year, ending that streak, but they also have great prospects this season. Just beyond breaking a streak, it's about getting to Atlanta, and they're going to be a serious contender in the East if they can beat Florida. As you said, a sold-out crowd, 61,000 in Kentucky, and right now they're playing just much better football than the Gators.
Guy just wrote in on our Facebook Live page saying that, in his opinion, he feels like the Florida Gators suspended players will not play another game for that team this year. And you're talking about felony charges. That's a realistic possibility. And Jim McElwain, Florida fans want to win now, but this is a tough hand he's been dealt here. This is a very tough hand. You open up against Michigan, you're breaking in a new quarterback. He doesn't have any weapons to play with, and you just have to lean on that defense like I feel like they've been doing since Tim Tebow was there. But athletically, you got to think they have enough to possibly go on the road and win this. But I'll go ahead and go on the record. I can't believe I'm saying this. Streaks were meant to be broken. I like Kentucky in this game. I think the fact that it's played at home, it's going to be a sellout. These kids are not used to playing in this kind of environment. And just the fact that Florida's down. If there's ever been a chance to end this streak, it's this year, and I like Kentucky in this game.
Yeah, things are lining up perfectly for a Kentucky win. You got the home crowd. You've got a better football team. Florida is trending down. And that's why I think Florida is going to win this football game, because there's nothing that makes sense about a 30-year streak, Hans. And coming into this weekend, there's not a great reason why Florida is supposed to win. But I don't think that the streak is going to be broken in a year in which we expect Kentucky to win. So for that reason, I'm sticking with Florida. I think they're going to make it 31, and there will be some team down the road, big underdog for Kentucky, who will pull it off and end the streak.
They'll be sitting pretty if they can walk out of Lexington with a win. It's amazing that it's come to this for Florida, and it's just been terrible set of circumstances for them, but they have to play the game. But I like Kentucky. I like the atmosphere. I think they're going to be fired up there, and I like Kentucky to get the win. And what a story it would be if you see the Wildcats at 6-0 head to Mississippi State here in a few weeks. Moving ahead, another big matchup. You're going to be at this game up in Nashville, Alabama. The Crimson Tide coming up there, #1 in the country. Vanderbilt, we know about the big win last week against Kansas State. What do you see out of this game, Alex?
I think the numbers people will be talking about, it's been 10 years since Alabama paid a visit here, just with that sort of wonky East-West scheduling. And then if you don't count the games that were forfeited, by the NCAA, Vandy has not beaten Alabama since 1984. So this is a very long and rough rivalry, if you want to call it that, here for the Commodores, and it's really a shame for them. They have a really good team this year. They've been missing a passing offense under Derek Mason, and they finally found it. And now they got to play Alabama, they got to play Florida, and they got to play Georgia to round out this crazy 4-game stretch, which began with that Kansas State game last week. I really like what Mason's doing with Vandy. But it does seem as if they're going to, fall by the wayside here against some of these bigger programs.
Yeah, you mentioned that run of football game. It's a tough stretch. I mean, as tough as any team will play in the country this year. But I think with the team that's sitting where Vanderbilt is at 3-0, I don't want to say that they don't expect to be here. They've definitely talked the talk this year. They're a confident football team, and that was a great statement game to start the season against a good Middle Tennessee State team. But it could go one of two ways. I mean, Alabama, I think we can all agree, is going to win the football game. But for Vanderbilt, a program moving forward, here they are believers at 3-0. What happens if they go into the game Saturday and just get lambasted? And all of a sudden you're dealing with confidence issues and you go into these other games and you're thinking, well, we weren't supposed to be here. Or you surprise the heck out of yourself. You go out there, you compete, and you say, you know what, we can't play with these guys. And all of a sudden you're in it against Florida and you give Georgia a good football game as well. It can go either way here with Vanderbilt.
Yeah, you're right. They lose this game by 50 points, that's going to destroy morale. No matter who you lose that game to, you're really going to be questioning whether your first 3 games were legitimate or not. And I don't see that, being the way things go here. I think they are going to keep it close for a while at least, because they do have a strong defense. They'll be able to complete a few passes, and they still have a great running back in Ralph Webb, decent offensive line. I think it will be one of those games where Vanderbilt, even if they lose, they can take a big step forward as a program, keep it close. Kyle Shurmur can take, even if they lose this game, he can have sort of a star-making turn against Alabama if he can throw a couple touchdowns and make some big plays. This could be sort of a breakout game for him. So I am, cautiously optimistic that Vanderbilt can keep it close for 2 or 3 quarters and give us a decent football game.
Alex and I are in agreement there. Alabama walks out of there with a victory on Saturday. And we are the Bud Light Selection Show. Do want to remind you, there's one thing fans can rally behind. That's tailgating with ice cold Bud Light. I imagine there'll be quite a few Bud Lights drinking at Jerry World on Saturday for the Southwest Classic. An interesting matchup between, going back to the old Southwest Conference days, Texas A&M and Arkansas. And Arkansas, a 2.5-point dog in this one, coming off a bye. How important do you see the bye playing into hand after what you saw the first couple weeks, and particularly on the offensive side of the ball from Arkansas? I mean, they had some stuff to iron out, no doubt.
Yeah, I almost want to say it's a negative to have a bye after a game like that, especially when you could have been playing, Cream Puff State or something last Saturday to try to work out some of those kinks on offense. I don't think sitting there for 2 weeks with the TCU film is going to do this team a lot of favors. I do hope that the offense sort of can come out of its shell here, especially Austin Allen, who, a lot of people talk about him potentially being the best quarterback in the conference this year, maybe some all-SEC recognition, and he is light years away from that right now. He really needs to turn it around, and this game might be an opportunity against sort of this struggling Texas A&M team, an opportunity to put himself back on the map.
The one thing about A&M, though, is they're very opportunistic on the defensive side of the ball. They're +8 in turnover margin. That's #1 in all of FBS. So, when you go back and you watch that first game against UCLA, and Texas A&M looked like world beaters. I mean, I was at a party, and everybody there was from a different school, and they said, whoa, we didn't expect this from Texas A&M. I mean, they looked phenomenal in that first half of that game, and they've not been the same team ever since. So I'm picking Texas A&M in this game just because I'm optimistic that team I saw against UCLA, who turns out they're not very good either, but it was just a very, 30 minutes of well-played football by Texas A&M. I think they can get back to that, at least enough to beat this Arkansas team, which has struggled mightily early on.
Yeah, it's really been two different seasons for A&M. It was like that first 40 minutes against UCLA, and then everything that's happened since then. And one of the problems I have with A&M is that they've sort of had a tough time trading scores and getting down the field when their offense absolutely has to. That was sort of the issue against UCLA. Was, hey, after all these great breaks and big plays and touchdowns, we can't move the ball when we absolutely need to. I did like that quarterback Kellen Mond had somewhat of a breakout game against Lafayette last Saturday. They had a big second half and won, I think, by 20 points. But I do really question, can they move the ball down the field when they have to? Arkansas does not boast, the stingiest of defenses, but I think they are going to be improved somewhat this year. And I think in that TCU game, too, for Arkansas, it was 7-7 for the bulk of that game, and things went awry late. But I am leaning more toward what the Razorbacks are going to be able to accomplish than the Aggies.
Guy just wrote it into Facebook talking about saying the loser of this game, the coach, could very well be on his way out the door. And that's an interesting point. I'm going to go with Texas A&M in this game, but I think the interesting point about this is the fan bases on both sides, Alex, and we've seen it in the SEC before, the negativity towards the end of a coaching tenure where the majority of the fan base and the boosters have had enough, and it's almost like they're looking for things to go wrong so they can complain, they can boo the players, and I've seen it with A&M this year, and I've seen it with Arkansas this year from both of their fan bases. And it's going to be an interesting dynamic in the fact that it's not a home game. It's played on a neutral field there in Jerry's World in Arlington, where potentially you could have both fan bases booing the performance of their team because they want to change at the helm of head coach.
Yeah, you mentioned people going to the Jerry Dome to drink Bud Light. I think a lot of Bud Light is going to be consumed this weekend, Hans. This game is bizarre to me because there really isn't a lot at stake here. To me, Kevin Sumlin is pretty much doomed no matter what. And it's going to take a lot more than this loss to send Bielema out the door. Neither of these teams is going to compete in the West. So to me, it's like win or lose. I don't think a lot changes for either side. It's just a couple kind of self-loathing fan bases that are going to show up and be angry, like you said. And it's not a pretty situation in either spot. But I don't think this Saturday really decides anything.
Yeah, I'd like to. Austin Allen's a fun player to watch, man. When he's got it cooking, but 37 yards passing against TCU's not going to cut it. Hopefully this bye week, Arkansas's got some things ironed out. I'm looking for an entertaining game. It's a noon kick, 11 o'clock local time there in Arlington coming up on Saturday. We do have one other game we want to break down for you briefly, and that is the Auburn Tigers, whose defense continues to carry the way. Hey, look. Alex, you called this early on in the season. Missouri comes out. They beat Missouri State by 400 points. Locke's throwing the ball all over the field, putting up video game numbers. You're like, hey, guys, pump your brakes. Pump your brakes. And we've seen what's happened since then. A complete abysmal performance their last two times out. And they're back at it again this week against Auburn, a team that looked very competitive against Clemson. And you got to think that their best football is still ahead of them this year.
Yeah, you'd hope so. They were pretty iffy last week against Samford, and the funny thing is, I don't think Auburn is in a very good place right now. But it's a minor miracle of sorts that they get to play the worst team in the SEC on Saturday, taking a trip to Missouri. And if that's not going to solve some of these problems for the Tigers, then I don't know what is going to. And they're sort of, they're still hanging around up there at number 15 in the country, hanging to some of these hopes that they can win the West, knock off Alabama. They are a really long way away from doing that right now. So you need to see progress on Saturday. I think there is a lot of pressure on Gus Malzahn and that team to perform on Saturday against, Missouri. It's not like, Missouri's not a good team, but they do have some of those sleeping giant qualities where, okay, they could go for 400 yards through the air or do something crazy. So it's not like you can totally sleep on them, but I think this is about as safe a game as it comes for Auburn right now.
So we both like Auburn in this game to get the win, and there's still 3 other teams in action this weekend. Don't forget, we'll go ahead and get to those games. We got Tennessee, UMass, LSU, Syracuse matchup in the ACC, another night game down in Baton Rouge, and South Carolina against Louisiana Tech. And Samuel breaks his leg last week for South Carolina. That's one storyline we haven't had a chance to hit on. This is a team, Alex, that's offensively challenged, as is. I mean, doesn't that just devastate them? You can make an argument as important as a player for any team on any side of the ball in the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah, I think the importance of Deebo Samuel really comes down to, you can look at the 1 minute of time that elapsed against Missouri when South Carolina was down 10-0, and then they're up 14-10 thanks to 2 fairly individual plays from Deebo Samuel, just using his crazy athleticism to make that happen. So that is huge for South Carolina, although originally they feared he would miss the whole season. Now it might be 5 or 6 weeks, and timetable's a little up in the air, but that's huge for South Carolina to lose him.
And Tennessee on the men, they get UMass this week. I mean, what do you tell your team? I mean, how many trash cans can you give away, with Rocky Flop and what happened down there in Gainesville? I mean, just has to be a heartbreaking loss. And coincidentally, ironically, exactly what they did to Georgia last year.
Yeah, it's not often where you throw a Hail Mary one year, you give up one the next, and psychologically, I don't know where they're at, but UMass, competitive football team, but they're 0-4 already this season. Lost to Old Dominion, Coastal Carolina, and most people don't even know those are FBS teams this year. So I think they'll be safe against UMass, but you can never be too sure with Butch Jones and the Vols.
It's going to be an exciting week of SEC football. Do it again, thank Bud Light for their sponsorship. Don't forget, guys, Bud Light, we don't just brew beer, we brew beer for friends. And good friend of ours, Mr. Alex Martin Smith from Nashville up there. Have a great time at the ball game on Saturday, buddy. And we'll do it again next week. Thanks to everybody behind the glass. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.